Good morning. The reading this morning is from the 20th chapter of Exodus and 5th chapter of Deuteronomy. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. 5th chapter of Deuteronomy. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your oxen and donkeys and other livestock, and any foreigners living among you. All your male and female servants must rest as you do. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God.
Changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart.
I invite you to be seated. The Lord be with you. Well, Sunday mornings, occasionally, we have this thing we do in the church called confession, where we talk a little bit about the things that we struggle with. So, dear church, I have a confession to make. I struggle with some of the 10 Commandments. And while we just heard the third one read, I have a particular problem with those last two. You know, the ones about coveting the things your neighbors have? Specifically, I have a coveting problem called holy envy. I have a touch, and it's more than a touch. It is way more than a touch of holy envy, of a very specific tradition that we do not particularly observe in the Christian tradition. It is the tradition of Sabbath keeping, of obeying that third commandment to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Specifically, I have some serious envy of the way many of our Jewish siblings build their days, weeks, and entire schedules around a day of rest. They have the cultural support and ritual around Sabbath keeping, where many of them stop from Friday night to Saturday night, and they focus on rest and renewal and family. It is a practice I wish I could keep. And even if I designate a day other than Sunday as my Sabbath, because let's face it, if I didn't show up for work on Sunday morning, y'all might wonder why you've called me as your pastor. But even though I designate Friday as my Sabbath day, even though I designate Friday as the day I do not work, I struggle to keep it. Because there are always appointments or chores to be done or something needs to be tended to. Right now, there are always boxes to be packed and organized while I get ready to actually move closer to the church so I don't have to drive so far every Sunday morning. Yeah, that's exciting, right? Right? But there's always something that needs to be done. And stopping everything rarely feels like an actual, real, plausible option. I struggle with it. And to be clear, as we dive into this season and this series of keeping the Sabbath holy based on this book by Marva Dawn, it is more than about going to church on a Sunday morning and just being here for an hour. Sabbath keeping is more than that. It isn't just pausing to zone out in front of a screen to shake ourselves back to consciousness and look at the clock and realize that 2 hours have passed and we don't know where that 2 hours has gone, even though we should have been asleep 2 hours ago. It isn't about buying all the fancy bath salts and face masks and expensive spa packages to treat ourselves for just a day. It isn't about magical thinking around self-care that it will fix all our problems and all we need to do is follow a specific Instagram influencer or a self-proclaimed guru. Sabbath keeping is intentional and holy rest. It isn't just sliding into exhaustion, it is pausing long enough for actual renewal. So this Lenten season, we are going to explore what it means to actually rest and not just pass out at the end of the day. Now, before you zone out on me and say, gee, Pastor Alma, that sounds lovely, but at this stage in my life, I really can't do that. There's too many people who depend on me and too much happening. I know. As a parent of a 5-year-old, I know, and my life hasn't even hit the chaotic elementary, junior high, and high school stages of life. And I know it is not easy. I know in many ways it's not even ideal, and it routinely does not even seem plausible. So many of our lives are so jammed-packed that we slide into the end of the day wondering if that thing that happened was just this morning, or was that 5 days ago, or was that just at noon? What has happened? When we pass out to sleep just enough to wake up and do it all again, some of us are surviving barely on fumes. But what I also know is that Sabbath keeping is about saying a holy no so that we can say a holy yes to something else. Sabbath keeping is a holy no to the false narrative that our busy schedules make us worthy so that we can say a holy yes to God's grace and love. Sabbath keeping is a holy no to the belief that we are in control and can make things happen the way we want them to happen, and a yes to surrendering to God what was never ours to carry. Sabbath keeping is a holy no to all of the things that strive to keep us from God or to be our gods, and a yes to everything that brings us into deeper relationship with God and with others. And I know that decision is hard because we hear a narrative on a daily basis that defines us based on our worth and our busyness, based on our production and our busyness rather than our being. So keeping Sabbath holy isn't about just a day of rest. It is about shifting our whole perspective and how we know our value. Yep, there we go. It's about seeing things in a whole new way, about changing our narrative and stepping outside of the culture's narrative. So to get to that, we're going to take a look at the readings from today. And many of you, I think I watched an expression of deja vu go across your face when we started reading the second one, and you thought, are we sure this is actually different? It was. There's a small but important difference at the end. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but the 10 Commandments actually show up twice in the Hebrew Scriptures. Once in Exodus, while the people are in the middle of wandering through the desert, and the second in Deuteronomy as the people prepare to enter the Promised Land. And within these 2 commandments, which we read from today, there are 2 reasons for keeping the Sabbath holy. So they start with the same general overview of that command, right? Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You rest, your animals rest, your servants rest, everybody rest. It feels like Oprah. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car, right? You get a day of rest, you get a day of rest. But then it changes. In Exodus, we hear that for God made the creation in 6 days and rested on the 7th. And leaving it here in Deuteronomy, we hear that we remember we were slaves and that God brought us into freedom. And those 2 things Those 2 verses are the reasons we keep the Sabbath holy. And over the years, several wise theologians, people much wiser than I am, have written many books and many articles. This is just a sampling of the ones I know of, exploring the different reasons and their theological implications. Now, in full confession, several years ago, I did a whole hour-and-a-half long workshop at a presentation on Sabbath keeping. I'm going to try to not let this sermon turn into an hour-and-a-half workshop. You all might walk out on me. Or in the hopes of not boring you all into a Sabbath nap in the middle of church, which I did have a pastor tell me once. He figured if people fell asleep during his sermon, they needed the nap more than they needed the words that he was going to speak that day. So feel free to sleep. God will work through you no matter what. Let's take a look at Sabbath. And we start in Exodus. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, but rested on the 7th day. So according to Exodus, we rest because God rested. And if God rests, we sure as heck need to rest as well. In the first creation story, there are 2. Check out Genesis. We hear that God created all of creation in 6 days, and on the 7th day, God rested. That rhythm of work and rest is built into our creation story and then is echoed back to us in the commandments in Exodus. But I don't know about you, but for me at least, with all of our technology and all of the scheduling and everything that is happening, it can be hard to pause for this rest every 7th day and truly disconnect. Because let's be real, there are always texts coming in, or emails that need to be responded to, or people to contact, or the to-do list running in our head, and we can think, I'm just going to do this one thing, and 5 hours later we are eyeball deep in something we didn't even mean to start. That may also just be an ADHD trait, but maybe you all know it too. Right? We can feel like if we stop and rest, the world that we work so hard to hold together might fly apart at the seams if we stop. But let me tell you a little secret. If God can stop and rest and creation doesn't crumble, you can stop and rest and creation will not crumble. Some things may drop. Some people may be upset when we say no. Our lives may not appear perfect as we wish them to appear, but the world will not end. And we get to learn and hear and face the hard but good news that we are not in control of all of the things we think we are in control of. And Sabbath keeping means releasing some things back to God's control. As you've heard us say a couple of times as we've started this renewal series and renewal as our word at Messiah, we cannot have renewal without release. We cannot find restoration and relationship and renewal with God if we do not release first the things that we were never actually meant to carry. Because here's another secret. Did you know something? God is God. You are not. We are not meant to be God. We are not meant to carry some things because those are only things that God can carry. And Sabbath keeping is an invitation, a weekly invitation to that reminder and a practice of letting go and setting things down, even if it's just for a moment and a time and we trip and try and pick them up again. That's why we do it all the time. A few weeks ago, I shared an image of the cross being instructional about our faith, right? Our faith is vertical and horizontal, a vertical relationship with God, a horizontal relationship with each other. And so too is Sabbath keeping. Sabbath rest is caring for ourselves and our relationships with God for the sake of our relationships with our loved ones. Because when we have to stop and give up control of things in people's lives and our lives, we are allowed to love people better. When I was younger, I had a pastor who I admired at the time and still admire tell me that I could only love others as much as I loved myself. And if I didn't love myself enough to pause and take care of myself, I could not help take care of others. Hear me say this clearly. Let me say it again. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. This is not a call to self-centered egotism. It is not a call to being narcissistic in our ways of being, but it is true that we can only take care of others in so much as we take care of ourselves. And sometimes this means saying a holy no so that we can take care of our souls and our spirits so that we have something to share with others, so we can say a holy yes to ourselves, our relationship with God, and later an actual true yes to our relationship with others. Which brings us to the second reason we keep the Sabbath. As the Israelites prepare to head into the Promised Land, Moses reminds them again of the commandments that sets them apart from the people they will encounter. And it comes again with the Sabbath keeping. There is a new reason, though. This time Moses and God say, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of slavery. So therefore we rest because God frees us to rest. This command comes as the Israelites are headed into the Promised Land where they will face new challenge. And God, who knows the people that God has traveled with for 40 years in the wilderness, knows that they will be tempted to turn to self-reliance, to control, and to other gods, and to systems that end up oppressing them. So God reminds them where they came from and what they are headed to. In Exodus 5, I'll summarize this, I'm not going to read it all. We hear that Pharaoh demands that the Israelite slaves no longer be given hay and straw that they need to build their bricks, but they must collect it for themselves. At the same time, maintaining the same level of production in the same amount of time. They are being asked to do more with less and face punishment if they cannot keep up with the schedule that has been given to them. And this is the system that God frees them from. God frees them from a system that defines their worth based solely on their production. More with less. Does anybody else feel that some days? God reminds the people that they are beloved just because they are God's people. That God loves them for no other reason than their being. It's not about their production, but their presence. And there is that no system that demands and demands and demands and demands of us and our being gets to define our worth, because God has already done that. God has already called us beloved. As I was getting ready to preach this sermon, a phrase that I heard a lot while I was preparing for my year with ELCA's Young Adult and Global Missions kept echoing in the back of my head. As we prepared for a year of mission work, we heard over and over and over again that our year abroad was not about how much we accomplished, because really, how much can you actually accomplish in a foreign country in a year? It was about how we were able to be present. And we would hear from our leaders over and over again, you are human beings, not human doings. Your worth is based on your being, not all of the things that you do. And I don't know about you, but this is news that I often need to be reminded of. Because in a world that feels like it demands more and more and more and more from us as a perfect parent or child or employee or citizen or spouse or friend, where everything is being asked of us, this is a reminder that our primary calling is not to produce, but to be. To remember that we are God's beloved just as we are. And if you need proof that the do more with less mentality is real in our world, when I Googled the verse to find out what verse that was, the more straw or bricks with less straw, this is the book I found. More bricks, less straw, doing more with less. How to be more effective in your job. The mentality is real. It is written down. There are guides to how to do this. And so we as a church get to tell a different story. Rather than focusing on more bricks with less straw, we get to focus on rest and renewal. And this is why we keep the Sabbath. We are freed from this system that demands more and more of us, and into a system where we are reminded that we are beloved just the way we are. To pause and to stop and to rest in our belovedness is an act of courage, an act of strength. So we're going to spend the next couple of weeks talking about this. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks keeping the Sabbath holy. If you've noticed, it's spelled kind of funny because it's whole. We're going to keep it whole, but we're also going to keep it holy. We're going to keep it as God has commanded it to us. And we're going to look at that in 4 ways: ceasing and resting, those holy no's, but also embracing and feasting, the holy yeses to the joy that can happen when we pause. And I know for some of us, committing a whole day to Sabbath keeping is near impossible. We're not asking the impossible of you. What we want and what we hope for is that whether you can commit a whole day or a few moments or just an afternoon or whatever time you have, that you can commit time to holy rest and renewal. That you can commit to Sabbath keeping to really, truly pause and be present with God, whether it is in ceasing and resting or embracing and feasting. We get to come into all of it. And in this, in the ceasing, in the resting, in the feasting, in the embracing, we start to shift our perspective and our worldview. And in doing so, we get to act and strive for renewal in our faith, ourselves, our community, and the entire world. And all of God's people said, Amen. I invite you to stand and join us in our song.
I am guilty, ashamed of what I've done, what I've become. These hands are dirty. I dare